for joining us today. Today, just as a reminder, this session will be recorded, so Sherry's put that up in the chat there, but I just wanted to remind you of that as we get started. And so today, some of you may or may not have already met Al, but just as an introduction, this is part of our series of doing a community engagement webinars with Dr. Al Condeluci. We're very excited to have his time and his expertise shared with our agency and with broader community members, because he has had a long and illustrious career beginning in the 70s. I know that's a wonderful career. Um, he's been associated with nonprofit organizations. He's been an instructor with the University of Pittsburgh, both in the School of Health and in the School of Social Work. He's authored 7 books that have focused on culture, community, social capital, and macro change. And last but not least, Al is a family member to someone who has a disability and was influential in shaping his career and his work. So we will turn it over to Al to get started, and I will make sure we manage the chats in the breakout room as best as possible. So take it away, Al.
Al, I think we've got you muted.
Okay, is that better? Am I back? Okay, thanks, Aaron, and thanks everybody for being available for this session. This is session 3 of our 6-part training session that we've been on. We had our first session several weeks back that focused in on the history of disability, where we actually looked at what has unfolded for people with disabilities, really going back to the earliest known records of disability, and how folks with disabilities have been treated over the years. And we spent special focus on institutionalization, because the history of disability really is not a very pleasant one. Folks with disabilities treated in really unsavory ways, and probably the most powerful being the era of institutionalization actually started back 1300s, when people with disabilities were put away into institutions. And sadly, we still have institutions today. In the 70s, we woke up and started to deinstitutionalize around the world, actually. And folks with disabilities finally were liberated. But still today, folks with disabilities are devalued, marginalized, and offset. This really leads to the second session that we did. That was a couple weeks back, on loneliness and social isolation. And in fact, again, this has also been the story of disability, is that folks with disabilities have been not just institutionalized, but rendered isolated in many regards. We talked about the toxicity of loneliness, and how when people are isolated and lonely, that literally bad things can happen and do happen. And we also talked in that session about the fact that loneliness has really been a worldwide epidemic on the rise. Even prior to the pandemic, we started to see the rise in loneliness, and the pandemic exacerbated that loneliness. But clearly, we're seeing now that folks feel more disconnected than ever, whether they have a disability or not. So that leads us to this session, this third session. And we've actually done these sessions in smaller groupings of people, because we want to be interactive. And what we want to focus on today is, how do you turn loneliness around? How do you address isolation and loneliness? And you do it by building relationships, by having people have the opportunity to engage and build relationships. And so this third session is really the kind of the turnaround session of what do we do about the history of disability in terms of people being institutionalized and isolated, and then the loneliness, a reality that has toxic elements to it that people with disabilities experience in greater numbers than folks without disabilities. And so we're turning the corner in this session today to focus in on the notion of relationships, define it, explain it, and then talk about its involvement in the work that we do at Community Living Kingston. And it's really ironic in terms of this this session on relationship building and on community engagement, because when Community Living Kingston was founded 70 years ago by family members and individuals who were who rejected the notion of institutionalization, they challenged the organization to find alternatives to institutionalization, to create new pathways and better pathways for people to be engaged in community. And yet, in that period of time, we've still been stuck. I want to talk a little bit about why we've been stuck and how we can turn that around. And so we're going to get the slides up and get right into some of the content. Um, this start slide is this quote. I love it because it's really powerful. Discovery consists of looking at the same thing as everyone else, but thinking something differently. Right? Looking at the same thing, and that's what we've been doing at Community Living Kingston for the last 70 years. We've been looking at um, getting people included, involved, and engaged in community. That's our mission. That's our passion, right? And yet we still struggle because of the notion of kind of getting caught. In fact, next slide, please. We know that people want to be involved in community. We know that all people want to be engaged. This list was a list that I constructed based on feedback that I've had in my long career of working with families and individuals with disabilities, and even in my own family, with my cousin who had Down syndrome, my father who had Parkinson's, is focusing in on what the people want, right? What can our organization do? And when we ask people what they want, here's what they tell us, right? And you can see displayed on this slide. This is what people want. And by the way, this is not just what people with disabilities want. This is what really all people want. Those of you on this call who have children, this is what you want for your children, right? This is what you want for yourself. You want to be healthy, happy, and safe, and be able to do meaningful things, and live where you choose to live, and be able to get around your community, and to build friendships, right? I mean, this is what all people want. Yet organizations like ours have struggled. In fact, let me show you the next slide that focuses in on how we've done in trying to get these things for people, getting people jobs, houses, rides, friends, so that people can stay safe and happy, right? But look at the results today. And this data, by the way, is relatively fresh, 2017, right out of the clearinghouse of disability statistics. And we know that people with disabilities are unemployed and underemployed and disconnected from involvement, and that people with disabilities really don't have many options of where to live and who to live with. Oftentimes those decisions are made for them, and getting around the community is limited. I mean, public transportation is being cut everywhere, And even if it does exist, often it's inaccessible and out of reach for people with disabilities. We know that friendship voids are huge for people with disabilities. That that the limitations in terms of access to community, engagement in community, have led way to people being isolated at greater risks and even dying sooner. We know that folks with disabilities have increased morbidity up to 10, 12 years sooner than people without disabilities. So the results of the work of organizations like ours hasn't really hasn't really been successful. And by the way, this is not just community living Kingston. This is really all over the world. The agencies, I ran an agency for close to 50 years in Pittsburgh, very much like community living Kingston. And yet we were saddled with these same poor outcomes, right? So it really begs the question, why haven't we done better? Next slide, please. Why haven't we done better, and how can we do better? What's been in the way? Why have we not been as successful as we want? As people want for that. And I really believe that there's some clear reasons why we haven't been successful. Next slide. I think we use a flawed paradigm, right? What I mean by that, by the way, paradigm is a Greek word that means the how to solve a problem, right? A paradigm gives you the boundaries and the borders and the framework for solving a problem, and so a paradigm is sort of like a map, right? But this look at this cartoon. Um, these two bees on the beehive, they have a map of the honeycomb, but yet they're lost. They're still lost, right? They've lost their way. So a paradigm is only as good as the quality of the paradigm that you're using to solve the problem. For example, if I if I want to come to Kingston to meet with you and to and to do a training session, I would need a map to help me get to Kingston, right? Some paradigm that helps me get from point A to point B. And now, um, and not just any map would do, though. I mean, if I had a map of Vancouver, that doesn't help me get to Kingston, right? It's a nice map, but it's the wrong map. And so I really believe that we have not used the right map in getting people more engaged in community in meaningful ways that can create relationships. Next slide, please. A paradigm, as I mentioned, is just a set of rules and regulations, right? A structure that helps us get from point A to point B. And in our field, in the field of disability supports and human services, we have a paradigm. Let me show it to you. Next slide, please. It's a micro paradigm, right? That's the typical way that we look at trying to get people um, to the goals that they want: a job, a house, a ride, and a friend, opportunities to be happy, healthy, and safe, right? And so the current paradigm that dominates our field is a micro paradigm. Now, here's these four bullets show that the aspects of a micro paradigm. It looks at deficiencies and weaknesses, right? It identifies that somebody has a problem, and that problem is in the way of them succeeding, right? I mean, this is true in all aspects of disability, and I mean, the medical model is a perfect example of that, right? If you're not feeling well, you call your doctor, your doctor will say, well, what's wrong with you? What deficits do you have? What deficiencies? What are you struggling with, right? And and then what we do is once we identify those differences, we separate people. We send them to places that we think are best for them. This is how institutionalization started, is we sent people to where we thought they could be helped. And that and so today, even today in 2023, 2024, if I came to Kingston with my cousin Carrie and I stopped anybody on the street, on the main street in Kingston, and I said, "Boy, I'm just moving here. You know, my cousin has Down syndrome. What do you think? What should I do?" People say, "Well, call Community Living Kingston. They know exactly what to do with those people who have disabilities. That's what they do. That's their job, right?" And that's why we pay taxes so they could do that. We give generous donations so they could do that. Right? And now that mentality, that separation mentality is huge, right? And what it suggests is then experts know best of what people with disabilities should have, and that they try to fix the problem. Let me use my own personal example with my cousin Carrie. My cousin Carrie, had Down syndrome, and when she was born with a cleft palate, and that cleft palate affected her speech. Right, she could not speak clearly, and so when when I started to learn this micro paradigm, when I got exposed to it, I told my uncle, I said, "Well, Unc, we've got to, help Carrie with her problems. And one of her problems is she doesn't speak well. So maybe we should get her therapy, right? Maybe we should get her speech therapy, and that would help her. And if she could speak more clearly, then, Carrie could be more successful in community." Now, that notion of fixing a problem that will then lead to a person being successful in community is a classic medical model, right? If your stomach hurts and it's causing you not to be able to do the things you want to do, then you want to find out what's that problem and how can I get it fixed so I can go out and do something. So you go see your doctor. Your doctor says, "Okay, well, we gotta, take care of that ulcer or whatever you have that's hurting you, that's preventing you from engaging." That's that's the micro paradigm. And it's been a classic paradigm used from the very beginning phases of institutionalization of people with disabilities. And you and I have been exposed to it as well in our own lives through the medical model, right? Now, this micro paradigm attempting to fix people. Let me circle back to my cousin Carrie. We send her to speech therapy. Carrie goes to speech therapy for thousands of hours, and in the end of all that exposure, her speech maybe this much better. I mean, it never fixed the problem, right? So in a way, when we think about disability and we think about intellectual disability or cerebral palsy or other kinds of developmental disabilities, the notion that we can fix them and ameliorate the problem is that's crazy. That's crazy. Next slide, please. Because the micro paradigm, if you look at it a little more closely, it really does some very powerful things, right? Not only does it suggest that the person has the problem and the problem rests in the person, but it labels the problem. It gives it a name. And the minute you label something, other people who don't have that problem get disconnected from you, right? You're this kind of person, they're that kind of person, right? So it begins to limit people, right? Now, labels are really powerful. I mean, when my cousin was born, the label on her birth certificate said mongoloid baby girl. We called people with disabilities, she had Down syndrome, we called it Mongolism. That was the term that was used. A label is powerful because it creates this distantiation, right, between the person labeled and everybody else. Right? But yet it's classic in the medical. In fact, if people don't have labels, they can't come to community living Kingston. You got to have a label to actually even come to the service system. Right? But then the paradigm basically separates people. It says you're better off over there until you get the help you need, and then you can come back with us. And then there's experts who do assessments, and then we try to help fix the problem, and we fail. And so at the end of the day, what actually happens is we create separate worlds. Next slide, please. Because the micro paradigm highlights difference, creates stereotypes, separates people, and then creates a community stigma about those people. Next slide, please. And here's the result. If we can't help people get engaged in community in typical ways, we then create separate programs to take care of them. And so we have places for them to live, we have vans to drive them, we have recreation programs for them, we have vocational programs for them, and all of those things create a separate, different, lonely world, right? Where people with disabilities are really offset. Right? Next slide. So here's the question: is this as good as it gets? That litany of separate kinds of things. And the answer to this is not just no. The answer is hell no. This is not as good as it could be. We could do better than this. And that's really what I want to focus in on. Next slide, please. Because we can get caught in a trap with this micro model where we just continue to think about somebody's problems to the point of literally just getting overwhelmed by it and not trying another way. So like this little cartoon here says a sheep standing in with a bunch of other sheep saying, wait, listen to me. We don't have to be just sheep. Here's me, a human service advocate with you saying to you, wait, listen to me. We don't have to use just this micro model. There's other things we can do, other ways we can intervene. Next slide, please. Because destiny is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. The choices that we make, how we choose to do supports matters. Next slide, please. So what I want to introduce to you is a shift from micro to macro thinking. Micro thinking is thinking about the individual and his problems. Macro thinking is thinking about all of us and our perceptions toward difference, toward disability, or any other kind of difference that then stigmatizes people, offsets them, marginalizes them, makes the boundaries greater for their inclusion in the greater world. Next slide, please. So a macro approach is really, it doesn't see the person with the disability as the problem, right? What it really sees as the problem is the fact that people in the greater community have attitudes about folks that are erroneous, maybe untrue, maybe unfair, but yet exist because people have been offset. And so for us, if we want to begin to use a macro point of intervention, then we really got to think about what influences community, what gets people in the greater community to change in terms of their thinking about something. Right? Now, in macro change, and this is what I teach at the University of Pittsburgh, is there are two tracks to macro change. The first track is a formal track, right? It's basically looking at the system and the laws and the rules and the regulations of a system. Let me give an example. When my cousin Carrie was when we were born the same year together. We were, we were big family on a hill. We were always together. But Carrie never went to school, right? I went to school with my other cousins, but my cousin Carrie didn't go to school with us because the schools didn't have to accept kids with disabilities. They didn't, that was their prerogative. If they wanted to, they could, but they didn't have to. And so our school system rejected Carrie, so she didn't get to go to school. And so a formal approach to macro change would say we got to change, we got to pass a law that mandates that kids with disabilities should have a right to go to school. It should be mandatory, right? And so in 1976 we passed a law here in the United States called Public Law 94-142, which was the right to education. And you passed similar laws in Canada that were formal macro efforts to try to get the community to broaden its perspective. Now, here's the thing about passing laws, and that is you can pass laws, but that doesn't mean that people like them or like what they're about. Um, I could pass a law saying, Carrie gets the right to go to school, but that doesn't mean that the teachers have to like it or that the other kids have to like it or the teachers, you know, begin to, interface with Carrie in a way that would, you can't legislate morality, right? You can't legislate in many ways. You cannot legislate that people embrace the cause or the reason for the formal rule change or law change, legal change, right? That only happens through relationships. And in fact, relationships change attitudes in dramatic ways. I mean, stop and think about when you first started to work at Community Living Kingston, okay? You first, and maybe you had no exposure to disability. It just sounded like a good job, or somebody told you about it, or you saw it in the paper, and so you went to Community Living Kingston, you applied, and they hired you, and you walked in your first day into, I don't know, a day room, and there were 30 people with disabilities in wheelchairs. You had never seen this before. Your first reaction is, holy moly, wow, never saw this many people with disabilities, right? But then you came back the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day, and pretty soon the the disabilities didn't matter. I mean, you just saw the person, right? You saw a human being, a caring, loving human being, right? Now, what actually happened? That was always a caring, loving human being. Your very first reaction to back away is classic. That happens all the time when you see something you've never experienced. But once you get to over that hump, you change, right? That's macro change. Your attitudes change, your perception changes based on exposure. Now, if folks with disabilities are separated out in classic kinds of ways of group homes and special Olympics and special work environments, special education environments, then there's never an exposure that's going to affect attitudes. So relationships matter. Every attitude that you have right now about life, about anything in life, was shaped through your relationships. Your very first attitude toward things is shaped by the relationship you have with your mom and dad and their attitudes toward things. But then as you got a little older and you got exposed to other people and other experiences, your attitudes began to change, right? So so macro change is really about exposure and building of social capital that's going to change the attitudes of everyday people. Next slide, please. So laws create, a baseline, and we need to have laws, but it's the relationships and the social capital that begins to change behavior. Next slide, please. So this idea of social capital is at the core of everything else we're gonna focus in on today and in the next 3 sessions that we have coming up in January, February, and March. Next slide, please. So what is social capital, right? Well, research shows very convincingly that social capital is at the core of healthfulness, happiness, and longevity. And that is that people who have more relationships in their life are healthier, they're happier, and they live longer. I mean, this is now confirmed data around the world, by the way. In fact, let me show you the next slide. Next slide, please. This slide introduces you to what we call the blue zones of the world. There are 5 blue zones in the world. And the blue zones were initially identified in 2009 through a National Geographic study. And what they were looking for, what National Geographic had looked for, is where in the world the people live the longest, are happiest, and healthiest. Where in the world are people living longer, happier, and healthier? And so they began to look around the world at records and data, death certificates and hospitalizations and all the things that would give them a sense of are there places where people outlive the benchmark and live better lives. And they began to identify these with blue circles on the map. They actually began to call them blue zones. And now they've added, by the way, they're just recently, just this last year, they've added a 6th blue zone. Singapore has been added as a blue zone. But what they've studied is what happens in these places. Like, why are these people living longer? Why are they healthier? Why are they happier? Like, what's at the core here? Right now, first thing to know is that economics were off the table. That none of these places that you see on this map are wealthy places or places where there's more income or greater capitalism, if you will. None of them. That money was off the table. In fact, next slide, let me show you the next slide, which summarizes what the elements were that led way to a better life. Okay? And they boiled down to 4. There's variations, and there's if you Google blue zones, you'll find all kinds of interesting data. But one thing that they discovered, and by the way, these aren't in any order of importance, but they discovered diet mattered, right? What you ate, what you put into your body mattered, because 80% of the maladies that kill people, cancer, heart disease, digestive issues, Alzheimer's and cognitive dementia issues, 80% of those are initiated through lifestyle. Through lifestyle. Digest that for a minute. Right? 80% of the maladies of the world are lifestyle oriented, right? Not genetic. Genes, plays a small role in this. Lifestyle plays the major role. So diet, movement, not necessarily exercise like on your Peloton bike or on your treadmill or the things that we do to think that we're exercising more. This is just natural movement, getting up, doing things, going for a walk, tending the garden, taking the kids out, physically doing things. Purpose, like purpose in life. Like, why am I alive? What is my purpose, right? And then last and most important, transcending the other 3, is relationships, social capital. Next slide, please. So what is social capital? Now, it first appeared in the literature, that term, social capital, first appeared in the literature in 1916, right? In an article that appeared in a journal, an educational journal, by a school teacher in West Virginia in the United States. His name was Halifan. And what he coined the term social capital because what he saw with his students is that the kids who graduated from his school and ended up being more successful in their town in West Virginia were not the smartest kids. They weren't necessarily the honor student kids. They were the kids that could build relationships. So Halifan coined it as social capital, right? Now, capital is a term that means value, right? If we want to start a new program at Community Living Kingston, we would need to capitalize it, right? We would need to find the resources to start it up. So capital means value. Social means your connectedness, your network, right? And that there are value that you reap, that all people reap from their relationships. And the three primary values are instrumental. That's the tangible reciprocity we get from relationships. If somebody does something for you, you'll do something for them. Emotional support, which is somebody got your back. You know you can count on somebody when the chips are down. And informational value, when your friendships, your relationships tell you things that help you, that are useful to you. Next slide, please. So we know that research is very clear. Since Halifan first wrote about this in 1916, and by the way, it remains sort of like an academic topic that people really didn't look at until Robert Putnam popularized the whole notion of social capital in 2000 with a book called Bowling Alone. And in that book, he really talked about the civic impact, the community impact of relationships, right? But research shows clearly that relationships are at the cornerstone of people getting jobs, of people keeping jobs, of people finding where to live, of being, of finding ways of getting around. Relationships are at the core of all of that. But look at bullet number 4 here. Social capital is tied to tolerance, respect, kindness, compassion, helpfulness. Those are called pro-social behaviors. And what we know is that they go up with relationships. Let me give an example here. We have 27 people on this call. And I would imagine that all 27 of us are compassionate people. We wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't have a sense of compassion. There's other things you could be doing to earn a living. You know that. Um, but I think it's your compassion that keeps you in this job, right? So you're compassionate. Let's establish that. Um, so here's the scenario I want you to sort of just think with. Um, your boss tells you that, instructs you, he wants you to go to a meeting. She wants you to go to a meeting downtown. And so, you're going to represent Community Living Kingston at this meeting. And so you on the day of the meeting, you drive into town, or you take the bus in, and you park, and you get out of your car or get off the bus, and you're going around the corner to go into the building that you have to go into. And as you come around the corner, you see a guy laying in the gutter, a homeless guy laying in the gutter. Right? Now, you've seen this already. We've seen it in our town. We know homelessness exists, right? There's this guy laying in the gutter, and it touches you. It's a cold day. You see this, you say, oh my God, this shouldn't happen in Kingston. We're better than this. And so you pledge that after you get out of your meeting, when you get back home, you're going to write a letter to the mayor, and you're going to write a letter to the premier, and you're going to speak out on this issue, and say there should be more funding for homelessness issues, right? So you go to your meeting, and the meeting is long, and you finish the meeting, and you get back in your car, you drive home, and you get home, and all hell breaks loose. The kids are doing this, you're going, and pretty soon you sort of forget about the letter, and you never write it, right? Even though you're a compassionate person. So listen to scenario B. That was scenario A. Here's scenario B. Your boss asks you to go to a meeting in downtown Kingston. So you get in your car, you get on the bus, you get downtown, get off, park your car, get off the bus, walk around the corner, and laying in the gutter is a homeless guy. It's cold. He's laying down there face down. As you get a little bit closer, there's something about the homeless guy that really pricks your curiosity, and you look a little closer, and it's your Uncle Frank. It's your Uncle Frank. It's your favorite uncle when you were growing up. There he is laying in the gutter. You haven't seen him in years. There he is laying in the gutter. Okay? What do you do? I don't think you go to your meeting, right? I think you pick Uncle Frank up, and what's Uncle Frank? Come on, let me get you some. Let's get some coffee. And your compassion spikes, even though you're a compassionate person. It's even more prominent because of the relationship you have with Uncle Frank. Not you had it with Uncle Frank. Don't even have now. You had it. That energy boosts your compassion. So we know that pro-social behaviors go up with relationships. You're nicer to people you know than people you don't know. You're kinder. You're more honest. All these things are more viable in your relationship network. Next slide, please. So, simply stated, the quality and quantity of your relationships matter, right? The more relationships you have, the happier you are, the longer you live, the more support you have available to you. I mean, all these good things happen. Now, let me share with you one really powerful statistic that as I got interested in social capital, right, when I started, and I heard Putnam lecture actually, and that's what got me going. And I started to dig down and study it and research it. And as I was doing my research, I actually wrote a book on social capital in 2015. The book is called Social Capital: The Key to Macro Change. And when I was doing all my preliminary research and understanding social capital, um, I came across the work of an anthropologist. His name is Robin Dunbar, Dunbar. In fact, if you get a chance after this call, Google Dunbar, just Google him, and take a look at his TED Talk. Dunbar's done a couple TED Talks. And Dunbar, the thing that I came across was a book he wrote called The Power of 150. And so I got the book, I read it, and in Dunbar's research, he's discovered that the typical person, now, by the way, this guy, Dunbar, teaches at Cambridge in the UK, and he's been teaching for 40 years. He's been studying social capital and relationships and research. And this notion of 150 was really engaging to me because he suggests, or not suggests, he shows in his book that the average person has about 150 relationships with social obligation or reciprocity. That is, if if the person asks you for something, you might be obliged to do it. Or if you ask them for something, they might be obliged to do it. It's called social obligation, right? It's a sociological construct. And so when I read that, I said, "Holy hell, 150!" I started to count. I mean, you're probably doing that right now. How many relationships do you have with social obligation, right? And so I thought, gee, I gotta put this to the test. So I got a journal and I started to write down the names of people. I really got tedious with it. The names of people that I felt I could reach out to, and they might do it. They might do what I reach out for. Need a cup of sugar. I need this. I need some help with my taxes. Whatever it might be, right? And so I started writing them down. I started first with my family, and then I went to my work site. Thought about all the people I work with that I could go to, and then I went to my neighborhood, and I thought about all the people I could go to. And then I went to my church. I thought about all the people I could go to if something. And then I, went to my golf league. I thought about all the guys that might do something for me. And then I went to my book club. And then I went to my gym. And then I went to and before you knew it, I had over 500 names in my journal. Right? 500 names. Right? So yeah, I paused and I said, "Wow, this is unbelievable." I wonder how many relationships my cousin Carrie has. Right? My cousin Carrie has Down syndrome. So I sat down with my cousin Carrie with the same journal, just the back of the journal, and started to write down the names that she told me of people she could go to that she thought they would do things for her. And we got to about 25. And that was it. Okay. So I said, well, wow, surely there's got to be some research on this in the literature. So I'm on faculty at the University of Pittsburgh, right? And I go to, the clearinghouse of data, and I keyword in there, um, disability and relationships, right? Just wanted to see. Surely somebody had to study this. And I couldn't find a thing. There wasn't one reference of any study about how many relationships people with disabilities have and how that compares or contrasts to people without disabilities. So I said, well, damn it, I'm going to do some research on this. So we did. We started to do some research, and we looked at it. We identified 250 people with disabilities. We had two sites in Canada, in Toronto and Mississauga, actually, and in Vancouver. We had four sites in the United States: Portland, Maine, Pittsburgh, my own agency in Pittsburgh, Kansas City, an agency in Kansas City, and an agency in San Jose, California. And then we added an agency that I do some work with in Brisbane, Australia. And so we had 7 sites, 250 people with disabilities. And we began to measure their connectedness. And we did a deeper dive into the interview process of identifying names. And the average number that that came out in our research was 24, right? 24 people that were identified by them, by the person themselves, of where they could have some social obligation. And so in a powerful way, this discrepancy just, it's at the bottom of my passion of of what we need to do. Next slide, please. So look at this cartoon, right? These are dog scientists, and they're studying how to get out into the community. And they know that the only way they can truly get out in the community when they want to go in the community is by learning the doorknob principle, right? And so here's my segue for you. Knowing how it could change the lives of people with disabilities in Kingston, The community living Kingston advocates struggled diligently to understand social capital because that is the doorknob to a better life. That is the doorknob to a richer life, a longer life, a healthier life, a happier life. Next slide, please. And so to think is to differ, and to think about how we've done things and differ with some of that is really how innovation happens, right? And begin to utilize some new methodologies, new interventions, better interventions to make things happen. Next slide, please. So here's our first poll question from the first module. And here's what I want. I want you to, we'll read the question, and then I want you to post your answer, A, B, C, or D, in the chat room. Right? So here's the question. A paradigm is a framework to address an issue. In supporting folks with disabilities, we typically should use A, the micro paradigm, B, the macro paradigm, C, both the micro and the macro paradigms, D, none of the above. So I want you to get into the chat room and just give your answer, if you can, to this, okay? So let's see what you do. So Kim Gum says B, okay? Just type in A, B, C, or D. There's a right answer. So Miranda says D. So who else? Come on. A, B, C, or D? Karen says A. Paula says C. Eleanor says C. Emma says, Laura says C. Maureen says D. Matthew says C. Todd says C. DSS Planner says C. Tamara, C. Tristan, C. Okay. All right, good. The C's have it because that's actually the right answer, C. And let me explain that. We have historically used the micro paradigm, so and I established that when we were introducing it to you. That's the historic paradigm, and it's the one with the deepest roots in our field. But there is some, there is some efficacy to the micro paradigm. Not all of it is bad, right? There are some things about individual change that are good, right? And so clearly, there are parts of the micro paradigm that should be used, but the macro paradigm has really been ignored, maybe not even thought about, and that paradigm needs to come to life. And so the answer is C, both the micro and the macro paradigm. There are individual things that can be done, and there are external, community, and attitudinal things that can be done. And so as we go through our training, we're going to focus on both. We're going to focus on what micro things can we do, what macro things can we do to really begin to boost and promote more social capital. Okay? So great job on that. Let's go to the second poll question on next slide, please. Poll question number 2. Same deal. Social capital refers to A, close people in our life, B, the people we socialize with, C, those people who bring value to our life, or D, all of the above. So what say you to this question? Do the same thing in the chat room. So DSS Planner says D. Athul says D. Eleanor says D. Dale, Kim says D. Chris, D. Jen, D. Matt, D. You guys got it. That's right. You're absolutely correct. The answer is D. All of these things define or describe social capital. There are close people in our lives. We call that our covenancy zone. There are people we socialize with. We call that our activity zone. And then just generally people who bring value to our lives. That's our acquaintanceship zone, right? So within our lives, all three of those describe social capital. And a little bit later, we're going to get into identifying platforms in those zones. Next slide, though. So investing in social capital as an organization and as individuals in the organization really require a couple things, right? The first is we have to stop with the clinical stuff, or at least put that in the back shelf, right? And really focus our attention on community, right? How community operates, how it's defined, and how can we reverse institution and micro treatment goal models? Like, it's taking 6 people in a van to the mall is an institutional. I mean, I know it's an outing. That's great. It's a day out, get away from, the house. But the image of that is institutional. What the image shows is that, you got 6 people rounded up and you got a shepherd taking care of them. And that the the stigma and the imagery, the optics are institutional. Okay. So let's flip into the next slide, please. The social problems that we face of I don't know, loneliness, isolation, disconnection, limitation, they stem not from individual differences, but from the failure of society to meet the needs of all of its members, right? This is a macro challenge here, not a micro, issue that can be easily dismissed or just blame the victim kind of thing that happens. It's a macro challenge. Next slide, please. So the first step here is recognizing and understanding community. How do we define community? What does it mean? I mean, it's in our name, Community Living Kingston. I mean, that's our name, right? So what does community actually mean? Have we even thought about it, right? Now, here's the definition of community. Community is a network of different people who come together on a regular basis for some common cause or celebration, right? That's the definition of a community. And there's multiple communities in your life. So here's what I want you to do in the chat room. I want you to identify one community that you're a member of that meets that definition. Let's go back to the chat room. Identify just one community that you're a member of. Okay? So let me here's some answers here. Hockey team. Good. Fitness club. Okay? Yeah, good. That's Eleanor said. Miranda said hockey team. What else? What is another example of a community? Library. Yeah, good, Tamara. Church. Great. Great. Maureen, good point. What else meets this definition? Network of different people who come together regularly for something in common. Any other thoughts? Work, good one. Absolutely. School, right. Study groups. Yeah. Board of directors. Yeah. Neighborhood communities. Yeah, Paula, you got it. We're in multiple communities, parenting groups and such. That the notion of community is multiple in life. It's not just one thing. It's not just one place. And often we sort of default to that. Community, Kingston. Yeah. I mean, that's one. That is a geographic community, right? But you're in so many other communities that meet this definition. Your family is your first community. Your neighborhood is a community. your work site, your church, the places where you are regular. Look at those three ingredients. Commonality, what do you have in common with those people? Difference, and then regularity, right? So regularity means you come again and again and again. In fact, next slide, please. Next slide drills down on this. That when we first meet people, we search for similarity, right? Similarity is I mean, this is, where are you from? Oh, did you go to that school? No kidding, so did I. Did you know so and so who went? I mean, that's the kind of small talk we make, looking and searching for similarity, because similarity creates, from social capital parlance, creates a bridge between people, right? Oh, no kidding. You went there, so did I. That's a bridge. You're Italian, so am I. That's a bridge, right? Those kind of connections create the start point of a relationship, right? Those are the basic ingredients. Now, differences differences push us away. Similarities attract us. Differences repel. And in fact, it's coded in us as a defense mechanism to literally avoid or watch out for things that are different to us, right? So when you encounter something brand new that you've never seen before, your very first reaction is to back away and try to figure it out, right? So differences do have an impact, and they can push people apart, no question about it. Um, and those differences can be something overt or something covert. What I mean by that is the difference can be, you look different from me. You're using a wheelchair and I'm not, or you're old and I'm young, or whatever that difference might be. That creates a gap, and how we overcome that gap is regularity and more similarity, right? So just regularity alone begins to create a humanization process. What I mean by that is, when you see somebody that's different from you and you're suspicious, or you're a little bit uncomfortable, when you see that person again and again and again, your reluctances begin to diminish, right? And you start to see more of the human being, um, beyond the difference, right? In fact, I wrote a book about this, and I wrote this book in 1996. The book is called Beyond Difference. That's the title of the book. And the book is about this very process of how do we get beyond difference, right? And we do that through regularity and more similarity. Similarities connect, regularity begins to humanize. Those two processes blend together in a powerful way to create a start point for relationships. Next slide, please. So this idea of community is a puzzle, right? Community is a puzzle. There's a lot about it that is very challenging, but it's simple, right? There's a simplicity to it. In fact, the Japanese have a beautiful word called shibumi. Shibumi, Shibumi. And shibumi means the blending of simplicity and complexity blended together. And things are shibumi in an Asian perspective that have that quality of simplicity and complexity. Like a bridge. A bridge is shibumi because a bridge unites people. That's a simple concept, but it's a complex process, right? That the bridge is engineered just so, and it's arched, and it has a fence so people don't fall off. So the blending of simplicity and complexity is shibumi, and that's what community is. Next slide, please. So with the folks that we support, um, the notion of really beginning to identify social capital and then position people to build more social capital. And let me show you this next slide. It's a sociogram. And a sociogram is an image. Next slide, please. This image of relationships. So think about this image like a pizza pie, right? And in a pizza pie, um, the crust is on the outside, and the most juicy part is in all the way in the middle, right? And then the other parts are good as well. So if you look at this pizza pie and you slice it up, like a typical pizza into maybe 8 cuts, and each cut would represent a community that you're a member of. Your family would be one cut of the pizza. Your neighborhood would be a second cut of the pizza. Your church would be a third cut. Your work situation would be a fourth cut. Your hockey team, your club, your group, your association, the things that you said in that last exercise, they would all become slices. And in each slice, there are people you know, which is the outer ring, the crust, people you do things with, a little less of those, and then people that you respect, love, and trust. That's in the middle. That's the deepest. Right? And for every community in your life, you have people who fall in one of those three categories in your life. Now, obviously, in your covenancy zone, that's the smallest portion. And it's not because you don't have a capacity to love a lot of people. We have infinite capacity to love. We just have a finite amount of time to love. And so that pushes that zone into a smaller a smaller image. For most of us in our covenancy zone, we have maybe 15, 20 people in our covenant, including family and, people that we really love and trust. It's a smaller zone. In the next zone out that we are active with, close to 50 people. In that outer zone, it could be hundreds of people in that outer zone that they know your name, you know their name, you say hello. You don't do anything with them. You're driving through your neighborhood, you see Mr. Jones cutting his lawn. Hey, Mr. Jones, how you doing? Pretty good, and you drive by. So the notion is we have this very robust imagery of relationships. So I want you to think about one client or consumer person that you support and think about how many slices that they have in their sociogram, how many places that they go on a regular basis where they might be known. Just think about it. And therein lies the very first interventive strategy, because I'm here to tell you it's much less than yours. There's much less slices of the pie. For some people, it's the family, it's the agency, and that's it, right? For some people. So maybe church. So the notion here in terms of our intervention is how do we find new platforms for relationship building? It's almost like if I was going to move to Kingston, and I know how important social capital is, and I'm leaving all my social capital behind in Pittsburgh, and I'm coming to Kingston, how would I build more friendships? Like what would I need to do in order to begin to build some networks? Right? Well, obviously, the first thing we need to do is to find what does Al Condeluci like or care about? What's he passionate about? What does he enjoy? And then begin to look for those kinds of communities in the Kingston area. So the notion of relationship building follows a simple formula. Next slide, please. There are 4 steps here. And this is the intervention piece. And by the way, we're going to be spending time in our next 3 sessions drilling down on this, really focusing in on it. Because step one is this notion of what does the person that you're supporting like, care about, want? What are they interested in? What affinities do they have? Right? So we want to introduce you to a cultural profile that we're going to be using to begin to identify these things in the people we support. You might already know them for some of the people you support just by virtue of them, you have conversations with them all the time when you see them. So you know some of these things. But what we want to do is we want to create a methodology here where we identify the key areas and affinities. Okay. The last three items we're going to be spending time on in January, we're going to look at community mapping. In February, we're going to look at, community infrastructure. And then in March, we're going to focus in on gatekeepers and strategies in the community. Right. But for now, let's talk about this number one, finding interests and affinities. Next slide, please. So we're going to use a cultural profile. It's an instrument. You should already have been introduced to it or have seen it. But it's a discovery process. It's just a little tool to help you discover more possibilities for slices of the sociogram pie for the person that we're supporting. Discovering possible places, targets for connection. So who is Carrie Condeluci and what does she like? What does she care about? What is she interested in? Right? How can we discover what she might really like or what she might want to try? Maybe she's not sure she likes it. Maybe she's never had the opportunity, so she's not sure, right? So this notion of finding these interests really become the fodder for the cultural profile. Next slide, please. So here's the profile, right? And you're gonna, you'll have this available to you, but it's actually just a little tool, a little document that you can, keep to organize some of this, right? So what it does is, puts your name and then the person that you're interviewing. If there's an informant or somebody that's helping answer the questions, identify who that is, maybe mom or brother, their brother is helping. That's fine. Just make sure you identify them. And then the personal issues, right? What's the age range? Because sometimes generations can give us some ideas of what might be a place. Educational experience, if the person's had any, this gives us a sense of some socialization that might have happened. And then spiritual religious interests. It gives again another thought about stepstones, start points. And then into the interest column, does the person have any hobby? You might have to actually describe what a hobby is, right? The person might not even know what that means. As a hobby is just something that you like to do, that you use some of your time for. It could be, something tangible. It might even be something intangible. Playing a game could be a hobby. So you might describe that or explain that. Or would you like to have a hobby? If you don't have one, would you like to have a hobby? It might be that the person said, nah, thanks. No, I'm not interested. Because recognize that, the person that's being interviewed, um, they may not want you to think less of them. No, I don't need that. I'm okay. I'm all right. Thanks. Community living in Kingston is great. It's been great to me. I don't need that. I'm okay. Okay. And then number 6 gets you into what are you most passionate about? Now you might have to explain what does that mean? What do you really get jazzed by? What really gets you excited? Right? What makes you really want to do something? Right? It's passion. right? Trying to find that. Next slide, please, gives us now some listings. From the following list, what do you like, or maybe you would like to develop some interest in this? Maybe not. Just check off the ones that apply. Cooking, knitting. So this is just a laundry list of interests, right? And it might be that people never knew that they could really be interested in something. They never thought they could do it. They never, or nobody ever really ever introduced to them the possibility that they could do it, or that they could have something other than what their worldview is right now. Right? So this is not just a discovery process. This is sort of opening, just opening some gates here of thinking. Okay? And then from this list, this is going to really guide us in our next session, which is community mapping. Because what we want to do is get a handle on, in the greater Kingston area, where do people gather to do this kind of stuff? What's going on in Kingston that might correspond or intersect with any of these things, right? And what are they regular? When do they meet? Does it cost any money? How do you have to dress? Where do you go? I mean, all that stuff will happen later in our community mapping, and then understanding the infrastructure, which we'll get to in January and February. But our first step is with the person. This is a micro step. What do you like? What do you want to do? What might get you excited? Right? Now, again, we've got to discover this, because that creates a sense of similarity with other people in the group who like gardening. These people who are a member of the group, they're already gardeners. So we want to maximize similarity of the individual. So when they go across that bridge, there's a greater start point for connection. Okay, next slide, please. So the magic of community is when similarity overrides difference, right? That we know that there's differences, and differences can create barriers. We understand that. We know that. So how do we get beyond them? How do we really create this magic of community? Next slide, please. So here's poll question 3. We're going to do the same thing like we did in the last ones. The 2 key ingredients to promote social capital in community are A, money and power; B, micro and macro issues; C, similarities and regularity; D, skills and competencies. So let's see. Get into the chat room and let's see. So Miranda says C. Okay. Anybody else? Kim, C. Emma, C. Laura, C. Atul, C. Jen, C. Todd, nice, C. Okay. We're seeing a message here. C is the correct answer. You got it. Similarities and regularity are the 2 ingredients that are at the baseline of building relationships. They're critical. Okay, poll question 4. Next slide, please. Here's the last poll question. We can discover what people like by A, doing a cultural profile; B, talking to others who know them well; C, observing behaviors and things they do; D, all of the above. So let's see what you're going to come up with here. Madison says D. Emma, D. Nick, D. Good. Good. Todd, D. You got it. Yeah, you don't need a cultural profile to get to know somebody. You could just observe it. You have a conversation, talk with people who know them, other people who've been with them. That gets it. So let's do this. Let's get into our next slide, please. And what we're going to do, you would be a leader, let them first come bridge. Next slide, please. Okay. we're going to break into, let's go back. Oh yeah, let's do this. No, let's keep it here, Sherry. Thanks. This bridge that connects people. Look at this little imagery, the sun shining. To see the sun shining on the other side over there, and there's a family kind of going across the bridge. It's a kind of a warm sort of image. But bridge building is at the core of relationship building, right? So let's get to this poem, and then we'll get to our exercise. This is a beautiful little poem. It's called The Bridge Builder. Simple. An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast, deep, and wide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim, that sullen stream held no fear for him. But he turned when safe on the other side, and he built a bridge to span the tide. Next slide. Old man, next slide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near. You're wasting your time with building here. You never again will pass this way. Your journey will end at the close of this day. You've crossed this chasm deep and wide. Why are you building this bridge at even tide? Next slide. The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the way that I've come, he said, there follows after me this day a youth whose feet must pass this way. This stream, which has been nothing to me, to the fair-haired youth might a pitfall be, and yes, he too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building this bridge for him. Okay? This is a beautiful poem. It's a metaphor for life, actually, because this notion of chasms in life are just part of reality. Every one of us on this call have faced challenges in our lives that none of us have been given a silver spoon. We've had to work hard to get where we're at, right? So here's the builder. He crosses the chasm. He makes it to the other side. He builds a bridge back. And the metaphor is that going back is bad because it really represents isolation, loneliness. And so the pilgrim thinks he's crazy. I'm like, why do you want to go back? You got a good life. You got a house, a ride, a friend. You're a job. You're doing okay. Why would you ever want to go back? And the builder said, I'm not building this bridge for me to go back. I'm building this bridge so that you can come across a little more easily, or Carrie Condeluci can, or people you serve can come across. So this idea of building bridges is really, I believe, a great metaphor for what we do as DSPs, as direct support professionals, as supervisors, as managers, wherever we find ourselves in the organization. Our responsibility is to help build bridges. Next slide, please. We must become the change we hope to create. And so let's get into our work group. We can go back to that slide, the previous slide, Sherry. Let's get into our work groups though, and begin to process. And what we're going to do is we're going to break into some smaller work groups where we can have a discussion. And we have some trigger questions established for you. And on these each group's going to have a different question. And then we're going to give you guys about 5, maybe 10 minutes to process the question. And then we're going to get back together to hear the responses from the conversations. Okay. So each group is going to have a spokesperson, and that spokesperson is going to be maybe taking some notes, and then listening to what people say and also adding in what they have to add. And then the spokesperson will summarize your group around your trigger question. So, Aaron, I think you're going to be putting folks together in their groups. So here's the breakout exercise. You're going to be divided into 5 random groups. Each group assigned a different trigger question. Member of the group will be the spokesperson. Spokesperson is responsible for capturing. Spokesperson is responsible for sharing the notes back with Aaron, so that we're trying to capture some of this in this whole training cycle. So, Aaron, what's the magic? We have to hit a couple buttons. Do people know who they're going to be? Here's the breakout exercise trigger questions. So group one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Group 1 through 5. Here's the question you have. So, Aaron, how are we going to do this? Just going
I have everybody set up to go into a different room. And so once I hit open the breakout rooms, you'll be assigned to a group. And I am going to broadcast your question again to each room as quickly as I possibly can, so you know exactly what question you're working on.
Okay. So time-wise, let's give us 10 minutes for the exercise.
Okay.
Now, here's just one key thing. When you get into your group, write down some of your reactions to the question, your private reactions, and then the group will start their process after each person has had a chance to identify some thoughts. So everybody has something to add to the conversation. Okay?
Got everybody back now, Al?
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Glad, hopefully we didn't have a whole lot of time for the conversation, but you had enough to at least chew on the question. We're going to be doing a quick reconciliation before we close, just to sort of hear the reactions from each of the groups. So we'll start with group 1, and group 1's question is, what do you think would be the best way to measure social capital? And I don't know who the spokesperson is, but from group 1, if you could just sound off and tell us how the group processed that question.
Hello, I'm Madison. I'll be the spokesperson for our
Hey,
group.
Madison.
Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So our first thoughts about it is we were getting pretty tripped up on the word measure, because often when we think of social capital, it's really, really hard to measure those kinds of things, because you measure things in terms of quantitative stuff, right? So it's like number of outings, number of people, but it's also important to consider like the quality of those relationships. So you have to do like a lot of qualitative measurements as well. So some examples that we were thinking of are things like, I know community living people will know this, but things like circle of friends and extended family. How many people are involved in those groups that they attend, and do they have meaningful connections with those people in those groups? Yeah, the number of outings and the quality of those outings. Also, a way to measure are things like looking at call history and things like that. So, are they actively connecting with people online through Facebook, doing video calls and that kind of things? Pictures, are they taking pictures, and who are in those pictures, and those kinds of things. Also, when they attend these kinds of groups and when they're with others, what are the similarities and differences between those people, and is there lots of common ground between them where they can find those connections? Another thing that we were thinking of was hobbies and purpose. So how many hobbies do they have? Are they meaningful hobbies, and do they provide a lot of purpose to their lives? And then the last thing that we were thinking of are something called core gifts. And I think Maureen is able to expand on that a little bit. Maureen, if you want to chime in now.
Thanks, Madison. I think that was just when we were talking about sense of purpose. And a lot of times we do things in the community that are around us instead of really looking. And the core gift is an interview. I don't know if anyone knows about it or not, but it's something I do with Bruce Anderson, and it gives, at the end of it's a statement, and that statement is something that we all have. We're born with it, and it comes through our life at different times and hence. So I always feel if people know their core gifts, then we know how we could help direct people in different ways. Because a lot of times people are told what they're good at, or team members, people around them kind of start that process. So this is a way of, it's all about the person to find that platform we're looking for to give the sense of purpose.
Great. Good conversation, even in that short period of time. Very robust, lots of really interesting pieces of the puzzle. And Madison, you're absolutely correct. This is a difficult thing to measure. And we just earlier today just recorded a video on a tool that we're gonna try out called the Social Capital Benchmarking Survey. but what it does is it doesn't necessarily measure the number of friends. It does the very things that your group talked about. It looks at outings and things that people have going on in their life and who they go with and how often do they go. So it examines those kinds of things. It touches a little bit on the internet and on the virtual kinds of communities and connections that we can have. Um, so great conversation and really good ideas. I really love the notion of pictures. I mean, everybody these days got a cell phone, a smartphone. Everybody's got their whole catalog of pictures. They're taking pictures everywhere they go, and that's a really interesting dimension to this notion of examining, the connections in somebody's life. So great job with group one. We're going to move right on to group two so we can stay on time. Group two had the question, what do you think is at the core of building social capital? And I don't know who the spokesperson is, but they can weigh right in.
So the core of building social capital, we talked about how people have to be in agreement with it and it has to be their choice. Like that would be the core of it. And just that they would have to value and desire wanting social capital. So that's not something that is forced. And then as like a support person, having consistency and follow-up with the person and their social capital. And then we got into talking about looking for the importance of looking for places that offer inclusion, because that's where you'll have the most success of building relationships within a community, to help people have a sense of belonging. And then as a support staff, so we got into then about as a support staff being very observant while you're out with someone. So seeing who's kind of coming up to them and like kind of who is clicking with who, and then how to support that. How to build relationships. And then also the importance of stepping back as a support staff. So once a kind of a relationship has been forming, the importance of stepping back. And that's pretty much it. We just had a bunch of points. It led into a really good conversation.
Yeah, that really is a good conversation, and the very first thing that you reported on, and that is for the person to be in agreement and for this to be their choice. That's a sacrosanct kind of a thing, no question about it. On the other hand, it's also important to know that there's some values piece tied to some of this, and sometimes if a person doesn't have the experience in doing something, they might just say no. I don't want to do this, and so I think that there's really an important role here in encouraging and really making sure that the person knows that this isn't some kind of a setup. This is really, if this isn't working or if this doesn't go the way you thought it might, then clearly we can bail. We can bail out. We can not be a part of that. So and that's also why we're starting this whole process with identifying an interest and using an interest as a fulcrum for relationship building, because making choices about an interest, and then if that leads you to other people you can have a relationship with, that's great. So it really sets the table for that. But it sounds like a really good conversation in such a short period of time. So great work with group two. We go to group three, and group three had the question, do you think someone limited in speech can build social capital? And if so, how? Group three?
Hi, my name is Tristan Halliday. I'm with Community Living. I'm going to be the spokesperson for Group 3. So how we went about this question is that I thought it would be good to talk about how the experience I support with people who have a speech impediment, and have, I forget the actual term of what he has, but he sometimes struggles with speaking clearly, and then those that will come with having anxiety and not knowing what he needs to do in the moment. So basically, when we take him into community, we want to get him prepared for that, and that's like having his options prepared and knowing what he's going to choose before we go out there, and having his values understood. And I think it's good that we show that in the community when we're supporting them, and that other people are witnessing that, and so that they can see what we're doing is really helping them, and that they can learn from that as well, even if they come across it in their lives some other time.
Mhm.
And as a group, I think we all have similarities with other persons served, and um, the social aspect and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's
Mhm.
we had a really good talk, and yeah.
Yeah, Tristan, this really raises an interesting dilemma, because we often think that if there is a communication or a speech issue,
Yeah.
that may really prohibit somebody from participating, and that's obviously not the case. I mean, in many regards, there are two pieces to the puzzle. Um, just being there and being a part of something, even without
Like not
actively.
taking their choices away from them.
Exactly, and
Yeah,
and
making
your
them do it
group
on their
picked
own.
up on that.
Mhm.
And also, I think that sometimes we support people really struggle to. Let me give an example. This is years ago. I was I was early on in my career, and especially in my thinking about this. And we were supporting a woman who had been institutionalized for a lot of years, and she had a really significant speech impediment. Um, but when she loved to macrame, do the crafting macrame, and that was the only good thing that ever happened in the institution where she was at, was she learned how to macrame. So when we started supporting her, we got her involved in a macrame club, just a generic group of people who came together once a week, and they did this macrame crafting. And again, her speech, she had cerebral palsy, so her speech was really garbled. It was difficult to understand her. And I was providing direct support for her when we got her to the macrame class, and I would go with her. And so I was really worried that her speech impediment would get in the way of her building relationships, and I wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case. And so I was almost like, um, I was like the interpreter at some high level international discussions where, the language being spoken is not known by the other person, and I, so we're sitting there, and the woman next to her asked her. She said, "Hey, wow, you do great. You do great work. Where did you learn to macrame?" And my friend, her name was Mary. She garbled back, yeah. And I was sure that this woman didn't understand her, so I jumped in, and I said, "Excuse me," I said, "This is Mary." And Mary just said that she learned to macrame, where she lived previously. And so the woman said, "Thank you." And so little time wore on, and then the woman asked Mary, and she said, "Well, where do you live now?" And Mary, and again, it was garbled. I was sure that this woman, her name was Joan, didn't understand. So I jumped in, and I was like trying to interpret. And finally, I realized that I was actually getting in the way. It was my own sort of nervousness about the speech that was really, I mean, people find their way through this kind of stuff, so it was really an interesting lesson for me about the notion that you don't have to be the best speaker to be able to build, connections with people.
Yeah.
So great work over there in group 3. Thank you, Tristan, for the report. Let's go to stay on time. We're almost out of time. Let's go to group 4. Their question was, how did you learn the skills of friendship building?
So we are group 4 and we didn't get our question. So we just talked about, so we had no idea. I did take a picture of the slide before we went into our groups, but the slide just had the first 3 questions. So we had no way to know at all what the 4th question was. So we just discussed all 3
Good.
questions, number 1 through 3 that we had available.
Good. Well, what did you talk about real quickly, Eleanor?
Well, in terms of the measure, to add to the first group, again, we talked about, the social connections, the number of connections people have that are meaningful to them, and then looking at some of the things that you talked about earlier. Are people feeling healthy, happy, fulfilled by those? In terms of the what do you think is the core social capital, again, to add to the other group, just talking about things in the community like opportunities, accessibility, of course, attitudes, and again, reinforcing what you said about regularity and frequency of exchange. Then the third one, we just discussed people who don't speak as a means of communication or don't speak clearly. And again, we said with all the devices that people have access to and modes of communication, and advocate/interpreter, if you're the person being that support, being a role model, setting the example of how to interact with a person that maybe has limited communication. And then frequency, regularity comes back to that again. The more you're exposed to someone who speaks a certain way, the more you catch how they speak. So
Yeah. Okay, good conversation. This question was about the skills of friendship building, but it's also captured in the next group. So let's go right to group 5. And what are the skills most important in relationship building? Group 5, what did you come up with?
Okay, so we started off with saying that basically people have a common interest, and that might not be a skill, but it does take motivation and initiative in order to kind of put yourself out there and connect with others. From there, communication is a really important skill, and that takes both, that's reciprocal, so the give and take of that on both sides, meaning listening as well as contributing and asking questions, is really important to kind of get information and also show respect to the other person. Giving time to allow people time if they need it, as well as reconnect with them if you haven't heard from them, right? So sometimes it takes some effort to maintain a relationship.
Great.
And yeah, so basically from there, just supporting each other, respecting each other, and over time that develops trust and relationship.
Great. Good conversations with all the groups. These trigger questions are just sort of fodder for thinking about relationships and exploring this a little bit more, because I really believe that this is job number 1 for us in the work that we do. That it's almost like the great white whale, getting to know all the elements of it as best as we can, so that as we try to support people in the process, we can underscore or try to prop up the kinds of things that are going to make relationship building begin to happen in people's lives, especially in the notion of dealing with the historic kinds of realities that people have experienced. So good work with all the groups. Again, to explore this a little bit more. Our next meeting is going to be in January. I believe that we're January 30th for this cohort. Our focus is going to be on community mapping. So we're really going to talk about discovering places and spaces in the community that might be landing zones for folks that we support to begin to engage. And the hope is then with the engagement, it leads to more relationship possibilities. Other than that, I think we're a little bit over time, so I want to apologize for that, but I want to thank you guys for the discussion and the repartee that we had. I want to wish everyone the best of the holidays. We're gonna take a little bit of a break from our training in December, so we all can celebrate with our social capital during these holiday periods, and looking forward to, as we move into next year, to really begin to be more deliberate in getting to this notion of social capital for folks that we support. With that being said, let me toss it back to Sherry and Aaron if there's any final parting pieces, and then we can adjourn.
Thanks so much, Al. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Al, for another great session today. I've had opportunity to visit a few of these sessions now, and you always learn something new. So it's really valuable for me, and I'm hoping you feel the same. Just for the group leaders, if you could send along your comments to Aaron through email or Combox in the next little bit. We're compiling from the 4 cohorts to try and have a bit of a comprehensive response to all of these 5 questions, and we're going to share it back out with everybody along with the video from today. And community living folks, if you want to keep an eye out in the Combox for some follow-up and homework to today's session, it'll talk about doing your surveys with persons served and the social capital benchmarking survey that Al mentioned earlier. We've got a little bit of information about that to share, and then Eventbrite folks, we will share that with you as well. And if it's something that you wanted to engage in, of course, you're more than welcome to. So stay tuned for some follow-up communication in the next couple days where we'll pass all of that along to set us up for our next session in January. So thank you again, everybody.
Good. Aaron, anything else? We good?
We're perfect. Thank you very much.
Great. Hey, guys, have a wonderful holiday season. We'll see you in January.